Hey folks, thanks for joining me for another review. Today I'm looking at the Spyderco Manix 2. This is the blue lightweight edition. The model number on this one is C101BL2. Just to give you my really brief, quick answer, as far as my overall opinion, this almost instantly made it into my favorite collection of EDC knives of all time. I just love this knife. It is made in the USA, as a lot of Spydercos are. This one is made, focusing in Golden, Colorado, USA Earth. As you can see at the base of the blade, right past the Spyderco opening hole, is Eric Glesser's logo, his little insignia he uses. And that means that, you know, he was the one that designed this. This is CTS BD1 steel, which is pretty new to me. I now own 2 knives in this steel, and I've been really happy with it so far. Now, this is available in a couple different configurations. I've got the plain edge, as you see here. You can also purchase this in a partially serrated, also referred to as a combo edge blade. So about halfway back from the blade, you'll see serrations running towards the tang of the blade. And also, there is a new black version of this knife. So, this one being the translucent blue, there's a new one that's a solid black. It's still very glossy and shiny. It's made from the same type of handle material. And that one, and also the second revision of this knife, have a pivot screw at the base of the blade. And you'll see this one does not. This model is pinned or riveted. So I cannot adjust the tension on this knife, nor can it be opened, you know, without destroying the rivets that are holding it together. Now, the newer version, the black model, and also the second revision of the blue model, it's still pinned along the body, so you still can't open it. But it now has a Torx screw at the pivot so that you can adjust the tension. So that's a nice little upgrade that this knife, this particular one, does not have. Not a problem for me because in this case, in this instance, the tension at the pivot is absolutely perfect. There's no play in any direction. And after I've been using this for, I guess it's been almost a month, it doesn't feel like there's going to be any tension, at least not with the types of tasks that I use typically with my EDC knives. I don't expect that that's going to loosen at all. Blade length on this one is 3.37 inches. Overall length is just over 8, just a hair over 8 inches long. And when closed, you're looking at 4.66 inches. So not too long, a little bit longer than your average, I would say the usual knife that most folks tend to keep in their pockets, a little bit closer to 3 inches. This is a little bit longer than that, but it's also pretty wide, so that's something to keep in mind. Weight is an astounding 3 ounces, so extremely light. And despite the thickness of it, and despite the width when it's in your pocket, the weight is so light that this is one of those knives you'll almost forget that you're carrying it. As far as any rust or corrosion issues on this CTS BD1, I've had none. I haven't had any issues at all. From everything I read online, this type of steel is actually fairly resistant to corrosion and rust. So most of you that aren't living in an extremely humid environment, you're probably not going to run into any problems. I'm relatively close to the coast and I've had none, so I think that most folks are going to get along with that just fine. Blade thickness is 1/8 of an inch, so decent medium thickness in my humble opinion. It is a leaf shape or drop point blade, whatever you prefer to call that. That's a typical leaf shape Spyderco blade shape, and as you can see, that is a full flat grind. Now, the handle is made from FRCP, which is fiberglass reinforced copolymer. I did not look into that too deeply. I can just tell you, in my slightly uneducated opinion, that it's pretty much plastic or similar to a plastic type material, and is also pretty similar to, although not quite as flexible as the FRN, fiberglass reinforced nylon that Spyderco uses. But as far as, I'm talking mainly about the feel. As a lot of you know in my reviews, I don't really get into the real technical nitty-gritty of knives. I'm more interested in comfort, how it carries, you know, how it feels in your hand, the weight, the shape, that type of stuff. And so that's the stuff that I'm typically going to offer to you in my reviews. And in this case, you know, I can't give you the exact composition of this material or really give you any other, you know, reference any other knives besides this one that uses it. But I will say that it feels pretty plasticky. It's got sort of a toy-like quality to it. It's a little bit more brittle than FRN or Grivery or some of those other type materials. It's a little bit harder than those, and it also feels pretty thin, pretty flimsy-ish. Not necessarily in a bad way, it just depends on your take on that type of feel. As I mentioned, it is pinned, so you cannot open it at any point. The handle is skeletonized. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see in there because it's see-through. It makes it a little bit difficult. You can kind of see these little ribs or ridges running along the blade or along the handle inside to give it some lateral strength. And the handles feel pretty stout. So it doesn't feel real squishy. I mean, if you really grip it, you can feel it flex a little bit, but it's no worse than FRN. You know, it's no worse than Zytel that we've all had on some other knives. But what's interesting is that because it has no liners whatsoever inside, it does feel a little bit, again, like I said, it feels a little flimsy compared to if it had some thin steel liners in there to give it not only a little bit more weight, but also to give it a little bit more heft, maybe a little bit more solidity to the handles. But overall, still not bad. And we got a wire pocket clip, as you can see here. I'm really starting to grow to like this pocket clip style a whole lot. I think that it's fairly discreet. This one sits very deep in your pocket with only just about a ½ inch or so sticking out the top. But it's a good secure fit with that pocket clip. It's a strong clip, and it is repositionable left or right hand tip up only. So you can move that around to the other side. It's a closed back, so as far as cleaning it, you're going to want to use some compressed air, get in there with maybe a Q-tip or a little bit of paper towel with a little bit of cleaner or cleanser on it, but you're not going to be blowing it out from one side to the other. It's got the usual sort of circular pattern, these little raised fins that Spyderco is also using currently on their FRN models. So it's really similar in that grip pattern. If you're familiar at all with some of the other ones like the Delica, the Endura, the Stretch, this is going to have the same feel as far as grip. And I do like the texturing on this a lot. It's really comfortable. It's not abrasive in your hand or in your pocket, but it does still afford you a lot of grip, so it's not going to come flying out of your hand if you're doing some really aggressive cutting. So that's nice. This has a little bit of jimping at the back of the blade, and then as you can see, it's got a little bit of these little raised bumps, sort of pseudo jimping along the back of the handle and then also on the inside of the handle. Now the regular Manix 2 with the G10 scales has a lot of jimping all along these portions, and so almost as sort of like a, who knows, as sort of like a little tribute to that model, or in keeping with the standard Manix 2 model, Spyderco decided to put these little molded plastic portions along it. And you know, they do a little bit. It actually does hold your fingers in place if you were worried about jimping. It works well. We've got jimping at the base of the blade in that little 50-50 choil, and at the top and bottom, and those are pretty darn grabby. So if you were to come forward on the blade, and this is my preferred method for holding this knife, I think you'll find a really secure grip, and you're not going to lose, you know, I don't think you're going to lose any of your digits to the blade there. It should stay in place pretty well. Overall, very comfortable. Again, it's got that grabby texture that's pretty nice. There's no points of irritation, even back here at this little, you see that little peak in the handle, and then obviously you've got some along the choil and on the inside of the handle there. I have had no problems with any of that. Even if your fingers are resting on those little peaks, it's not at all uncomfortable. I don't know if that's just due to the material, you know, that it's not as sharp as it would be if it was G10 or steel, but just super great in every position. I've been really happy using it in this little forward grip, I guess you could say, where as soon as I go to open it, my fingers just naturally kind of want to move up into that position. But even holding it farther back works just as well. There is a huge lanyard hole on this knife, as you can see there. It is the largest one that I know of on any of my knives. In fact, here's my Paramilitary 2, which previously had the largest lanyard hole of any of my knives, and it is bigger. You can see them side by side. It's definitely larger. So you can put just about anything through there. You could probably double up. You can definitely double up on some 550. You could probably even double up some leather cord for those of you that like to put a leather lanyard or fob on your knife. That would work beautifully and would fit through there with no problem. It carries deeply in your pocket, as I mentioned. It also carries very comfortably, so it's not going to get snagged on anything. And despite the fact that this blade is pretty wide when it's closed compared to, say, let's see, the Kershaw Skyline. I mean, this is, you know, width-wise, this is taking up a lot more real estate. But even in spite of that, because of the smoothness of the design and how thin the knife is, when it sits in the corner of my pocket, I'm generally able to grab past it very easily. You know, I don't have any problems reaching down to the bottom of my pocket to get my flashlight or another tool that might be sitting just past the knife. The opening mechanism, as on pretty much every single folding Spyderco, not just pretty much, but definitely, is that round opening hole, which I feel is pretty exclusive to Spyderco. I know some other companies use it, but in my mind, in my heart, this will always be a Spyderco, signature feature, I guess you could say. There's just something about it. Whenever I see it, even when I see a competing brand using a round opening hole, my first gut reaction is that, hey, there's a Spyderco I've never seen before. Oh wait, no, it's Benchmade or whoever. But there's the lovely Spyderco opening hole. This one is 14 millimeters, quite large, and it can be opened easily with or without gloves. So for those of you who might be thinking you'd use this in a work environment where you're wearing some type of glove, that's going to open beautifully. That's one of the things I really like about Spyderco's. Thumb studs I sometimes fumble with. Some of the thumb discs can sometimes be fumbled with when you're wearing gloves, but the Spyderco opening hole, I've just never had a problem on any of the models that I've owned. The pivots, the pivot washers, I believe are bronze. I have not opened it, as I mentioned, this is pinned, but when I peer down in there, they look to be the phosphor bronze washers. And one of my favorite things about this knife is how absolutely and utterly smooth the pivot is, both opening and closing. It doesn't feel necessarily very fast, but there's no grit, there's no grittiness or scratchiness to the motion at all. It feels like oiled glass. It feels like it's on bearings, but maybe just not quite as fast. It is very fast though, and for those of you that like to flick your knives, you can always use this knife just like a Benchmade axis lock. You can pull back on this lock mechanism and flick the blade in and out, and it does so beautifully, really, really fast, and it's a lot of fun. All the different fun little flick methods are available to you. Blade centering on this one is really good. This is something that's going to differ from one knife to another, so don't be too worried if yours is a little bit different. Obviously I only have one example of this knife, and on this one it just so happens to be really well centered. So, I guess I give them high marks there, although that's something I'm not ever really picky about. But, just want to show you that, mention that little detail. Now, the lock, as I've shown, is similar to an axis lock in how it performs. It functions a bit different as far as the exact inner workings. This is the caged ball bearing lock. So if you saw my Spyderco Dodo review, you saw that particular knife has just the ball bearing lock. This one performs almost identically, but has this little polymer or plastic cage that encases a ball bearing. I don't know if you can see down in there, I'm starting to lose my light this afternoon, but there's a small steel bearing that sits at the end of a post with a spring. And you can kind of see the ball bearing there if I kind of tilt it in the light a little bit. And then there's a piece of plastic that encases that ball and holds it against the base of the blade. As you compress the spring, it draws the ball out of a channel at the back of the blade and allows the blade to close. And as you open it up, that spring pushes the ball into that channel and your knife locks open. Very basic design, very similar, like I said, in performance to the axis lock. Very clever, really comfortable, fast to use. One of the greatest parts of it is that it is ambidextrous, so if you are left-handed, take that pocket clip, flip it over, and you can close this just as easily. Now I'm going to sit here and fumble trying to do it left-handed, as I am nowhere near being ambidextrous, but it can be opened and locked and unlocked very quickly with either your left or right hand, whichever is your preference. No wobble or wiggle or play. I've had no issues with the lockup. It's just been rock solid. Overall strength, though, I would say that these handles, because they're thin, because they're linerless, and because of the material that's used, this would not be what I would consider a hard use knife. I would not take this for some of your heavy duty outdoor activities. I wouldn't chop away at wood with it. I typically wouldn't chop with a folder anyway, but some of those harder tasks, this isn't going to be the knife for you. And I think most people, just using a little bit of common sense, I think you can tell by the materials. Because it's so lightweight, there's some sacrifices in strength and overall integrity. And I think that those sacrifices leave you with a really light knife that's really comfortable, fun, and fast to use, but it's also, not designed for some of those hardcore cutting tasks. Go for something with some steel liners or maybe some G10, something a little bit more robust in the handle. Factory edge bevels are really even both sides. They're really nice. A lot of times on Spyderco's, I think because so many of them are so clearly hand ground that you get some unevenness. Sometimes they don't go very far back towards the base of the blade. But this one is pretty even as far as the overall thickness and angle of those edges. I've only had to strop this knife so far, which is another high mark for that CTS BD1, because I've used this knife a lot and so far All I've had to do over the last month is just a light stropping every few days to keep it razor sharp at the edge. Let's see. My pros on this model are that it is definitely lightweight, really comfortable both to use and to carry. You know, it's got a great useful blade shape. I love those translucent blue handles. I think they're just beautiful, and it's one of my most attractive knives in my opinion. On that note, I should say, originally the reason I didn't buy the Manix is because I thought that the handle was really ugly, and I still think it's pretty funky looking, but it's one of those classic Spyderco situations where once you get it and hold it in your hand, it just makes perfect sense. It is so utterly comfortable in my medium to large size hands in any position, you know, when I choke up or move back or whatever, that it begins to look good just because of that. So while I might not have liked the look of it before, once I hold it in my hands, I carry it, I think it is just wonderful. So I really like the look of it now, despite still knowing that it's, you know, an odd looking knife compared to even some of Spyderco's standard fare, which a lot of Spyderco knives look weird. I'm starting to ramble. Let's get back on topic here. So I do really like those handles. I do like that it has that really generous lanyard hole for people who do like to use a lanyard on their knives. I like that it's got that large opening hole, which is perfectly compatible with all sorts of types of gloves, for those of you who wear gloves at work. It's a lot of fun to open and close, even if you're going to close it in a more deliberate, slower manner, or if you want to flick it, snap it in and out. It's still a lot of fun either way. I love that it's 100% ambidextrous. I am right-handed, but it is nice to know that lefties can have just as much fun and as much comfort carrying and opening and closing this themselves. Now, on the downsides, as far as cons, I don't have too many of them. I do think that the handle can feel somewhat brittle and flimsy, like I mentioned. And then again, it's not really a good choice for really hard use. And it might be a little bit too wide for some folks when you're carrying it in your pocket. I have small pockets on my jeans. My jeans are pretty slim fit, and it's not an issue for me, so I don't think anyone's going to have a problem, but I did want to share that just in case. It's just about perfect, and it is one of my favorite knives. It's just a joy to carry and use. So much fun and such a cool design. Quick comparison, and then I will end this video. There's your Paramilitary 2 next to the Manix 2. Pretty similar in overall length. A little bit, you know, a little bit different in the blade shape and in the handle shape. This is another really comfortable knife. Show you a quick thickness comparison. They're really, really close to one another, if not identical. You know, it kind of looks to me like the Paramilitary 2 might be just a hair thicker. So there's that guy. Let's get the Endura out here with that similar kind of lighter feeling handle, not quite as maybe professional or robust as G10 or steel handles would feel, but there's a size comparison for you. Let's try the Spyderco Tenacious, my work knife. This one shares work duties with the Cold Steel American Lawman, but there's a little size comparison for you there. And let's do, well, I had the Kershaw Skyline out here. Let's get that one out there just for fun. And then last but not least, let's get out the Ontario Model 1 folder. So there you go, a few comparisons. This has been my review of the Spyderco Manix 2 lightweight model in translucent blue. Highly recommended. If you've got the cash set aside, if you can afford it and you're interested in it, I do recommend it. Just go right out and get it. Give it a try. And I think that you'll like it a whole lot because it's a really comfortable design and it's a lot of fun to open and close and use. Thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.